time are like, what happened? Some of you heard me tell the story before, but I worked at a church as a lay person who worked with outreach in downtown Birmingham, and it was a tight schedule. They had a 7:30 service, a 9 o'clock service, and an 11 o'clock service, and they wanted to have Sunday school in between the 9 o'clock service and the 11 o'clock service, which made things even tighter than they are here. And the dean of the cathedral told the staff, he said, look, we're going to start 3 minutes early every Sunday. The 9 o'clock service is going to start at 8:57. We're not going to tell anybody that. They'll figure it out. And so, it just seemed bizarre to me, but sure enough, at 8:57, we would start the service. And, after about 6 months, people realized, I guess their clocks are fast or whatever it was. Anyway, he just wanted those extra 3 minutes. Anyway, he's a nut. Since we have another minute or so, I'll tell you we had some storm damage. Y'all might have noticed some storm damage. The elevator is not working. The chairlift is working. So be careful as you walk through the hallways. If any of you is staying for the 11 o'clock service, after the 11 o'clock service, we need help moving all of the sandbags behind the shed behind the kitchen, which is only going to take 3 or so people. But if you're staying for the 11 o'clock service, right afterwards, if you would go out to the parking lot and help move sandbags, we would appreciate it. All right, it's 10 o'clock. It's time to start. Welcome. Today is the third and final class in our series on Old Testament parables. Every week we've looked at a different parable, and I use that term loosely. And although the study of these passages is in and of itself interesting, I'm far more interested in learning how to read the Bible better. And I hope that by the time we're done, you'll have a sense of how you can read the Bible better. Let's start with a prayer. It's the prayer at the top of the handout. If you're just walking in, we're glad you're here. There are extra handout by the coffee pot. The same handout is also on the screen. But let's pray that prayer at the top of the page out loud together. Direct us, O Lord, in all our doings with your most gracious favor, and further us with your continual help, that in all our works, begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and finally, by your mercy, obtain everlasting life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Before we read the text, how familiar are you? How recently have you studied 7th and 6th century BC Near Eastern geopolitical history? Anybody feel like you've got this 500s BC down pat? Well, I'm going to save the history lesson till the end. But if you remember some of that history, you might hear in this parable more fruit than the rest of us. But hopefully by the time it's all over and we get the historical reference, it'll all come together beautifully. But let's start with the first parable, the first part of the parable. This is Ezekiel chapter 17, and we're going to start with verses 1 through 6. We're going to hear about the first of 2 eagles. There are handouts by the coffee pot if you've just come in. Would somebody read for us the first 6 verses of Ezekiel 17 using the microphone that Dave will bring you? Who would read that for us, pretty please? Thank you. Eileen will read it.
The word of the Lord came to me, O mortal, propound a riddle, and speak an allegory to the house of Israel. Say, thus says the Lord God, a great eagle with great wings and long pinions, rich in plumage of many colors, came to Lebanon. He took the top of the cedar, broke off its topmost shoot. He carried it to a land of trade, set it in a city of merchants. Then he took a seed from the land, placed it in fertile soil, a plant by abundant waters. He set it like a willow twig. It sprouted and became a vine, spreading out but low. Its branches turned toward him. Its roots remained where it stood. So it became a vine. It brought forth branches, put forth foliage.
Thank you. All right, if you remember your 6th century BC geopolitical history, don't respond. But those of us who didn't read about that yet, how does this sound to you? Like if the prophet showed up and said, all right, I got a story to tell you, and this is the way the prophet started, what would your sense be? Where do you think the story is going? It's good news, bad news? What gets your attention? Help me hear this. How would you hear this, do you think? And if you're new, raise your hand because we want to hear you, but also people online will want to hear you as well. Is this good news? Yeah, Dean.
With no background information, it would sound like good news to me.
Okay, yeah, good news, yeah. Pleasant, fruitful, prosperous. Yes. I'm trying to think of those people in our lives that when they, like, you know, when your parent sits you down and says, let me tell you a story. And the story begins happy, you kind of know that by the end it's not going to be so happy. And prophets rarely give good news. It's almost always bad news. So I bet the people who heard this were like, All right, so let's break it down. Notice in the first verse, the second verse, I should say, God says to the prophet Ezekiel, speak an allegory. That's a particular word. Assuming that this is indeed allegorical, let's break it down a little bit. Let's just imagine. We're all guessing. As we guess, what's the eagle? Yeah, Ray's got an answer. What might the eagle be?
God.
God. Yep. What else? Any other ideas of what eagles are? When we think of eagles, think about how we describe eagles, right? They're big, powerful, majestic. There's a reason it's a national symbol for us, partly biblically, but other than that, you know, Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey. You remember this story, right? Turkeys are smart. Turkeys are really smart. Bald eagles are vultures with a better PR story, right? They're not great. Though I'll tell you, now that they've come back since the DDT ban and the resurgence, when you see a bald eagle soaring, it warms your heart, doesn't it? Yeah. Nathan, do you have a response to this? Yeah.
I feel like the eagle represents empire or
empire.
A powerful force coming from
Yeah,
the
something
outside.
powerful, imperial. Yeah, I love it. Thank you. I love it. All right. Anybody have a radically different guess for the eagle? All right, what about what's the cedar of Lebanon and why breaking off the top shoot? Especially, I mean, you don't have to know 5th century, 6th century biblical history to know cedar of Lebanon. Like, what's the image? Just help me explain it. What might the cedar of Lebanon represent, and why would we break off a shoot? Yeah, Ray, thank you.
It might be the choicest part of the tree.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Eileen in the back.
The choicest part of the tree.
The choicest part. Yeah, thank you. What else does anybody remember from the Bible what the cedars of Lebanon represent? It's not Christmas. What do the cedars of Lebanon represent?
Is it wealth?
Wealth and power. Like they were big trees, not like our cedars, big trees. Those of you who've built a house lately, if someone put a particular kind of wood in their house, what would represent wealth and strength? Cedar, maybe teak. I don't want to pick an endangered or a threatened species, but not plywood, not particle board, right? Do y'all know enough about geography to know where Lebanon is in relationship to Israel? Right, they're not far away. At this time, sort of on a border, but it's kind of this part of the territory has been assumed by the nation of Israel. So Lebanon is kind of a part of Israel at this point, and the cedars that grow there are a major source for construction, right? Like the quarry, the quarry up near, the flyover on the way to the airport, the big quarry. Like the cedars of Lebanon were an important building material for important building projects. And if you could afford it, you would want it because it was strong, straight, big. All All right, help me understand the rest. So, an eagle, a great eagle, a colorful eagle, a strong eagle, maybe an image of God, maybe an image of empire, comes, breaks the top of the cedar, possibly the choicest part, and carries it off to a land of trade and a city of merchants. When you think of a land of trade and a city of merchants, biblical or otherwise, what are some cities that you think of? Just say them out loud. Yeah, Richard.
Babylon.
Babylon. What else? New York.
Tyre and Sidon.
Tyre and Sidon. Any other cities of trade? Yeah. All right. Then notice in verse 5, I know we're breaking this down a little more detail than you might expect. We'll move more quickly for the rest. All right, so after the eagle comes, breaks off the top of the cedar tree, takes it off to a city of merchants, plants it in the ground. I don't know if that works, but apparently it works. Right, then I think that means the eagle, takes a seed from the land, placed it in fertile soil, by abundant waters, set it like a willow twig. Remember, willows grow near water, right? Anybody have a willow in their yard that causes trouble for your pipes, right? Anyway, sprouts, becomes a vine, spreads out low, right? Spreads out, right? So just unpack that for me. What's the image of? What are some words that you would use to describe this setting? Yeah, Ray.
Well, on further reflection, I'm a little worried because if you break off the top of this tree, it's probably going to die. I don't know what's going to sprout. A cedar will sprout roots, so maybe it's a artificial, temporary, feel-good construction as opposed to planting the seed, which seems more in line with the laws of nature.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about cuttings or cedar trees to know how likely it was that this grew. So that's a good question. Good question. I don't have the answer. But I appreciate the fact that you're starting to become suspicious, and maybe the hearer would have been suspicious too. What else? What other words would you use to describe what we've heard so far? Yeah, Trent, and then Dean.
I think of the word transplant.
Transplant. Yeah, sure. What else, Dean?
Breaking off the top of the tree would make me think of closest to heaven, taking that down and bringing it down to a lower level.
Yeah. And the most recent growth, right? Sometimes I'll hear, and I've done it before too, but sometimes I'll hear those of us without Native American identity or roots talk about a place on a totem or a totem pole, right? You've heard this. And I bet you've heard white people like me talk about the low spot on the totem pole. If you know anything about Native tradition, that's actually the place of honor. It's the foundation upon which the other generations are built. And isn't it funny that when we borrow somebody else's tradition and appropriate it to our own culture, we might do so in the opposite way that it was intended? I've tried to stop using that image, and I might gently correct you if I hear you do the same. But in the same way that a totem, the bottom is the foundation and the top are the youngest generations, the newest. The same is true for a tree, right? I mean, hence the totem, right? The top of the tree is the youngest part. It's the newest part, something new. It's also the closest to heaven. Yeah. All right, so we've got two different agricultural images. We've got the top of the cedar tree and now a seed that has grown into a vine that is running, right? It's sending forth branches, and so far we're by water. We are growing. I think we anticipate fruitfulness. Yes? Let's keep going. Who would read about the second eagle? Just 2 verses. Who would read from Ezekiel 17, 7 and 8? Who would read that bit for us, please? Yeah, thanks, Dean.
There was another great eagle with great wings and much plumage, and see, this vine stretched out its roots toward him. It shot out its branches toward him so that he might water it. From the bed where it was planted, it was transplanted to good soil by abundant waters, so that it might produce branches and bear fruit and become a noble vine.
All right. So maybe instead of breaking it down the way I've written the questions, let me just ask you what's going on. Like, all right, we've had one eagle, and now we get to a second eagle. Without knowing what the eagle is or what's happening in the world at this time, how would you describe this progression? What's happening? Yeah, Ray. Or what is of note? What seems interesting in this bit? Ray?
Well, now that there's a second eagle, it's probably not God. It's like angels, ministering spirits.
Yeah, so second eagle, probably not God. Yep. What else is going on? What's happening in the story? Yeah, Richard.
I think it could be that one empire sort of supplanted the other.
Yeah.
Saw what the other empire did and tried to emulate what they were doing.
Yeah, great. So you don't need to know anything about biblical history or biblical imagery to know eagle might be associated with empire. Now we've got two, right? Yeah. So and let's run with that for a little bit. Let's run with that. If the eagles represent different empires, what's going on with the vine? And who might the vine be? And what is that telling us about Israel's history? Might it be telling us about Israel's history? Yeah, Dean.
I look at the vine in contrast to the cedar. It's a lot easier to cut down, but harder to get rid of permanently.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I can't remember if it was Laura Walsh. Somebody recently, I think it was Laura, told me as she was doing some research, maybe it wasn't, the line in the gospel according to John 15, where Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches, that some people think, and maybe it was, I can't, anyway, if you're in the room, wave your hand and tell me it was me, that the vine might actually be vineyard, that it might be, the translation might be off, that Jesus might be saying, I'm the vineyard and you are the branches, the vines. Regardless, we've got this kind of image of spreading, of growing, of somebody maybe of less importance. Maybe it's the hoi polloi that we are, the vines. We're the branches, right? Yeah, maybe. Do you read so far? Let me put it this way. When you plant your tomato plants, they're probably already in the ground, they're probably growing, right? When your tomato starts to move in a different direction, like when instead of growing straight up and it starts to, maybe that branch sort of curls off and starts shooting to the side, do you blame your tomato plant? Does anybody say, you stupid tomato plant, why would you grow where the sun is, right? No, right? Like implicitly in horticulture, we don't blame plants, we don't blame vines for where they grow. We have a climbing hydrangea along a fence. I don't blame it for creeping through the fence and starting to grow in my neighbor's yard. It's not the vine's fault. It's my fault for either planting it there or having a bad fence or not keeping it pruned, right? So I think it's part of what we're seeing in the story is it feels natural to me. Like the second part feels like I don't think the prophet is saying, you stupid vine, why would you grow in that direction? Like so far this is like a natural evolution of vines, which is to say people, maybe nations. Yeah? Anybody want to push back on that and say otherwise? Anybody want to take or respond to that in a different way? Anybody want to wrestle with that image of the vine growing where we didn't expect it to? Yeah. Like transplanting, as Trent said earlier, sometimes you plant something in a place in your yard and it just doesn't work, and you move it somewhere else, and that's where the plant wanted to be. Whether because it gets more light or more water or less light or the soil's better, right? So sometimes we just have to figure out where it belongs. Where is it going to flourish? Yeah? Sometimes we're the same way. Sometimes we just need to move in order to flourish. All right, let's keep going. There's a change in the air. Who would read for us, please, Ezekiel 17, 9, and 10? Thank you, Liz.
Say, thus says the Lord God, will it prosper? Will he not pull up its roots, cause its fruit to rot and wither, its fresh sprouting leaves to fade? No strong arm or mighty army will be needed to pull it from its roots. When it's transplanted, will it thrive? When the east wind strikes it, will it not utterly wither on the bed where it grew?
Thank you. Not good news. So much for that. So help me make sense. I feel like this is a bit of a surprise or a bit of a turn. What do you think about that? How do you make sense of this, Ray?
Transplanting is always a violent, risky process.
Sure is. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, what else? What else would you say? A weed is, one definition of a weed is a plant out of place, right? You ever drive by, it doesn't happen as often in Northwest Arkansas because we don't have a lot of row crop farming, but when you're driving through the river valley or through central Arkansas and you see a big field of wheat or soybeans or whatever it is that they're growing, and you see that one stalk of corn, the volunteer, it's just like, hello, I do not belong here, but I was here last year, right? You kind of have to tip your cap to the corn for sort of sticking it out, but it doesn't belong. It's a perfectly fine, well, it's probably not that great, but for the most part, it could be a perfectly fine corn plant. It's in a field where they're growing something, but it's not what the farmer wants to grow. And you can't really, well, you can because there's so much, but you wouldn't really want to harvest that with your cotton or your wheat. Like, you don't want to mix that up. So I wonder if, in some sense, if we're going to blame the vine for this, if part of it is where you should have been to begin with. What do you think? Help me interpret that. So, like, if your parent or a mentor told you what we've read so far about your life, like, just imagine that your mentor or parent brings you in and says, let me tell you a story. And they tell you Ezekiel chapter 17, 1 through 10. I want you to imagine what's going on in your life that this might be your parents' advice. This might be your mentor's advice. Imagine with me, make up with me a personal situation. Just make up the story that fits this parable. What do you think? Yeah, Ray.
Well, I ran across this fast-talking, very impressive stockbroker, and he wants me to quit my job and start selling stocks for him, and then he later turns out to be a crook.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good one. What else? Make up another one. Yeah, that's a good one. What else? What else? And it doesn't have to fit perfectly. It doesn't have to fit perfectly. Yeah. I mean, the grass is always greener on the other side might be a fit for this. What else? Yeah, Elizabeth.
I had a child that moved from Northwest Arkansas with a very successful career at a large company here, wanting to move to Dallas to another job without really knowing where that's going to work. And it's the strength of I told him, it's your strength of the individual. Can you handle if it doesn't work? And if it doesn't work, how are you going to deal with that? I mean, those are big questions you have to ask, even though it looks real appealing. What if it doesn't work out just as you thought it would?
Yeah.
And is that plant going to survive? Is it strong enough to survive? Are you strong enough to survive in Dallas with this job?
Yeah.
If it goes south?
Yeah, thank you. That makes me think of one. Think of it this way. Like, imagine that you get that job offer and you move. And then about 6 months after you and your family settle in this new house and this new job, you get a better job offer and you pick them up and you move. Like, how many times after moving is your family going to become such a challenge? Like, are they going to face challenges that you can no longer be successful in your career, even if the pay is good and the work is good and you're enjoying it? Like, if your kids start having trouble in school because they've moved so much that they don't have friends, and then that manifests itself in physical illness. Like, my kid has a cold and hasn't been able to get over the cold for 8 months, and now I'm having to take time off of work. My spouse is having to take time off of work. We still own a house back there, and that's creating anxiety and stress. Like, imagine, like, yeah, okay, I got it. Like, even if it is good, even if there is fertile ground that you're moving to, sometimes the move itself, the transplant itself, as Ray said, is costly. Yeah. What else? Help me out. What else might you feel? Yeah, Trent.
So I'm just thinking of a situation of a child who is transplanted for reasons perhaps where the child was not a fruitful place to grow.
Yeah.
And, my advice to that child sometime is, you might not like the hand you were dealt, but it's the hand you're dealt, and it's the hand you've got to play.
Yeah.
It's kind of like where you're planted. You may not have chosen it, but this is where you are. This is where you got to grow. That's kind of what I'm thinking about in this. And it may not be great, it may be challenging, but it's what it is.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. This is not a response to your particular insight, except that it sort of allowed my mind to spin in another direction. I would not use this image with a child or a teenager. But sometimes we plant a plant in a place that it doesn't thrive, and we know we have to move it. And still sometimes the moving of the plant is harmful to the plant because because sometimes the hand you're dealt, you're not able to make that move. And maybe to come back to the image, maybe to expect more of the plant that the plant is able to give because of where it started and because of the need to move it is unrealistic. Yeah, I mean, again, yeah.
It makes me think of one of our sons who went through some therapy, and the therapist said, which I thought was so brilliant, because he was looking for a geographical fix, and she said, no matter where you are, there you are.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Any other ways of trying to imagine how this parable might make sense in your context or in our context without going back to the 6th century BC? Any other examples that you might give? All right, before we keep going, let me ask a tricky question, I'll acknowledge. Without reading the rest, where is God in the story so far? What is God's role in the parable? Yeah, Richard.
It could be that God is revealing this to us. It's God's teaching us something that we need to know, maybe across cultures and centuries and continents, but it does specifically apply to their situation there also.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah. What else? So maybe there's revelation in the story, but not action in the story. Anybody else want to say? It doesn't feel like God's the eagle. It doesn't feel like God's the tree or the vine or the water. Where's God? Where's God? Anybody else want to take a crack at that? I don't have an answer. Yeah, Jonathan. David's going to stop coming to class because we're working him out so much.
I wonder if God is the east wind.
Ooh.
Here, because almost like a judgment piece to that, it feels
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I wonder. You know, if you have a problem drinking too much and you always wake up with a headache, you could say that God is the headache. But you don't really need God to be the headache. It's just the consequences of your actions, right? But I think there's a lovely sort of blending there, right? Like we don't need God to be the east wind in order for the east wind to remind us of God, right? Of God's presence, what God is doing, the moment of clarity, right? Yeah, Nicole, yeah.
I remember once before someone talking about the idea of the far-off God and the idea of the near God. So the God sort of in the universe, out there, creator, big God, as opposed to like the interpersonal, the God who lives in me and knows me and I pray to God. And God, to me, I don't see God acting, or I don't see these plants and animals turning to God or talking to God in a way that's like a near God. It's like a far God to me.
Yeah, which might be the point. I mean, maybe the point is God isn't in the story. Where's God in your life, right? Maybe the story wouldn't end up this way if God were in your life the way that God seeks to be in your life. Yeah. All right, well, let's read the explanation. The prophet himself, through God, gives an explanation, and then we'll unpack it a little bit more. But who would read the next bit, which is titled The Interpretation Given? Who might read that bit for us, pretty please? Thank you. Garrett?
Then the word of the Lord came to me. Say now to the rebellious house, do you not know what these things mean? Tell them the king of Babylon came to Jerusalem, took its king, its officials, and brought them back with him to Babylon. He took one of the royal offspring and made covenant with him, putting him under oath. He had taken away the chief men of the land, so that the kingdom might be humble and not lift itself up, and that by keeping his covenant it might stand. But he rebelled against him by sending ambassadors to Egypt in order that they might give him horses and a large army. Will he succeed? Can one escape who does these things? Can he break the covenant and yet escape? As I live, says the Lord God, Surely in the place where the king resides, who made him king, whose oath he despised and whose covenant with him he broke, in Babylon shall he die. Pharaoh with his mighty army and great company will not help him in war. When ramps are cast up and siege walls built to cut off many lives, because he despised the oath and broke the covenant, because he gave his hand and yet did all these things, he shall not escape. Therefore, thus says the Lord, as I live, I will surely return upon his head my oath that he despised, and my covenant that he broke. I will spread my net over him, and he shall be caught in my snare. I will bring him to Babylon and enter into judgment with him. Therefore, the treason he has committed against me, all the pick of his troops shall fall by the sword, and the survivors shall be scattered to every wind, and you shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken.
Thank you. What's happening? Can you start to see the connections? Can you start to see the eagles? Let's come back to that. Turn over to the next page. We're going to come back to the end. The historical record. I'll read this. This is from the great book of wisdom that is Wikipedia. It's just a very handy shorthand for what's happening. All right, so I'm going to read this. The defeat of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in 612 BC at the Battle of Nineveh by the Neo-Babylonian Empire caused upheavals that led to the destruction of the kingdom of Judah. Egypt, concerned about the new threat posed by the Babylonians, moved northward to support Assyria. It set on the march in 608 BC, moving through Judah. King Josiah attempted to block the Egyptian forces and fell mortally wounded in battle at Megiddo. Josiah's younger son, Jehoahaz, was chosen to succeed his father on the throne. 3 months later, the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, returning from the north, deposed Jehoahaz in favor of his older brother, Jehoiakim. Jehoahaz was taken back to Egypt as a captive. After the Babylonians defeated the Egyptians at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar II besieged Jerusalem. Jehoiakim changed allegiances to avoid the destruction of Jerusalem. He paid tribute from the treasury, some artifacts from the temple, and some of the royal family and nobility were taken as hostages. The subsequent failure of the Babylonian invasion into Egypt undermined Babylonian control of the area, and after 3 years, Jehoiakim switched allegiance back to the Egyptians and ceased paying tribute to Babylon. Because of this, Nebuchadnezzar II invaded Judah again in 599 BC and again laid siege to Jerusalem. In 598, Jehoiakim died during the siege and was succeeded by his son Jeconiah, also known as Jehoiakim. Jerusalem fell within 3 months. Jeconiah was deposed by Nebuchadnezzar, who installed Zedekiah, Jeconiah's uncle, in his place. That's a lot of history, but can you kind of see the connection with the biblical text? So there's a lot of political action happening in this region, and the kings of Judah, the kings of the southern kingdom, are trying to figure out which horse to back, like who's going to help them out. Is it going to be Babylon or is it going to be Egypt? And at first, it was Egypt, right? Because the Babylonians come in and invade the Assyrians, and it looks like they're going to win. And we don't like that. They're threatening, so we're going to back the Egyptians. And sure enough, the Egyptians kind of push them back. But then when the Egyptians fall, we're going to become loyal to the Babylonians. We'll give them a lot of money and a lot of good stuff, so they'll be nice to us. But then they struggle in battle, so we're going to switch back to the Egyptians. And then they struggle in battle, and then we're up a creek. That's the political bit. Like, that's the history book. That's not the Bible book. That's the history book. Given that historical back and forth, and you'll see that the king of, the emperor of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, is officially the kingmaker. Given that background, let's go back to the historical bit, the interpretation. Make the connection for us, please, between what happened in history and what happened in the parable. What's the parable trying to teach us about history? Eventually, it'll all come together, I promise. Just hang with me. Yeah, Ray.
Back to the first parable, verses 5 through 6. It looks like there's a vine, and I'm just inferring this is a vine that got planted in Egypt after the death of.
I think the other way. I think that's the first allegiance to the Babylonians, right? So apparently the top of the branch is that first king. I'm not going to switch back and forth, so that is Jehoiakim, right? So Jehoiakim says, "Oh yes, Nebuchadnezzar. Oh yes, Babylon. You'll be in charge." His son, right? So Jehoiakim is the top of the cedar tree, and the other royal family and nobility are the seed, if you will. I think that's the clearest connection. So they start this first part of the parable. The land of trade and city of merchants is Babylon, as Richard suggested earlier. Jehoiakim, the top of the cedar tree, the king, the last sort of the line of David, if you will. The vine is sort of the rest of the nobles, right? And for the most part, things seem pretty good with Babylon in charge. But then Egypt comes, another great eagle, right? And the vine says, "Ooh, this one's got us. Let's switch our allegiances to Egypt. Egypt's our best hope." So then they say, did we offend you when we backed Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians? We were mistaken. We are so sorry. What we really meant was that you are the best. You're our favorite. You've always been our favorite. We'll pay you a lot of taxes if you'll keep us safe. And again, that seemed like the prudent political decision. But of course, Egypt fails. And Babylon wins, and siege happens, and things get really ugly for the king of Judah and for the people of Judah. Any other questions or responses to the parable before I ask some deeper theological questions? Yeah, Ray.
Well, if the Egyptians are able, King Josiah was a good king, right?
Yes.
Very faithful.
Everybody
he gets killed fighting the Egyptians.
Yes.
Why wouldn't it be reasonable to say, well, this is a sign that God's favor has now shifted to Egypt?
I don't know. I mean, I think the biblical text is written and revised in a way that reflects the historical record, right? So I presume that despite dying at the hand of the Egyptians, very quickly it became clear that the Babylonians were the best in the land, and you want to back the champion, the winner. So even though he died at the hand of the Egyptians, I think that the Babylonians were the strongest. Yeah.
Is there an ethnic element here? I mean, Abraham is basically a Mesopotamian. And is the idea that you're supposed to maintain cultural continuity with the Mesopotamians?
No, I don't think so. I think think about the Genesis record. He leaves Ur of the Chaldeans being sort of a primitive expression of Babylonians, right? And so I think there's this sense of going. Like people, I mean, actually, in some ways, the Quran is helpful because the Quran will tell stories about how in his career, Abraham was building idols to false gods, and yet in the midst of this idolatrous career, Abraham hears the voice of the one God saying, "I'm the only one, come and follow me." And so, in a sense, he leaves that behind. Confusing because he sends his children and his grandchildren go back to find spouses, but it's always about leaving. They've left that. Yeah. So I think a cultural break. I don't think there's a comparison there. I do think the prophets will make a big point about the fact that you were delivered from Egypt. They were your enslavers. Why are you asking them for help? Other responses, reflections. Is it interesting to you the way the Bible matches history? Right? Is that fascinating to you? I find it fascinating. Trent.
I find it fascinating the way it reflects current political dynamics where you have people recorded being 100% against a certain potential leader, and then that person gets power, and all of a sudden they're 100% for that person in power.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing how that happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. What else? Let me ask some theological questions. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Holy cow. Since 615 BC, that place was politically and religiously tormenting itself all over, and it still is.
Sure. I mean, really since about 1000 BC, right? It's a rough estimate, but 1000 BC is when David was there, and that's the last time things were easy. Like the successor, even during David's lifetime, there was civil war. And then after that, conflict has continued ever since. I mean, there have been moments of peace, and by moments, we might mean 150 years, which to a country that's 250 years old sounds like a really long time. It's really not. If we're talking about 3,000 years of history, 150 years, that's not very long. So there have been moments of peace, but we've kind of moved from one political force to another. All right, let me ask the theological questions. So, why tell a parable? Like, why not just skip? Like, you could cut out verses 1 through 10, and the prophet can just say, do you not know the king of Babylon? You could just give the explanations. I mean, why bother with the parable? Why bother with the story? Yeah.
It may have more to do with psychology because you want people to think about what you're saying. And, I guess you could also say theologically there are different levels of heaven, perhaps, there are different levels of truth.
Yeah.
And you want to get down to the very kernel of truth and pass that on to people so that they will think about it and come to a good conclusion.
Yeah, thank you. I want to unpack that for a little bit. Let me start at the beginning, which is sometimes you can teach a lesson better with a story, right? That's the reason we tell our children stories. It's the reason we tell them stories or use analogies or fables, right? Because it sticks with us. A related endeavor, which you, I think, talk about the next is, like, what truth are we trying to convey? And maybe what we really want is something more complicated, more nuanced, more layered than just the simple, that was a bad choice. That was a bad choice. It's one thing to sort of tell your kid that was a bad choice. It's another thing to invite them into a framework where they're not only able to see that was a bad choice, but why it was a bad choice, how it could have been different, where could they have gone down a different path, if this happens again, how will it play out differently. But also, I think, to kind of step back from the simple cause and effect. I want to return to the point about the vine. I think God and the prophet could have come up with a different analogy if the only thing God wanted the people to learn was we shouldn't have chosen to back Babylon and then switch to Egypt. Because the image of a vine, that's a strange image. There's not a lot of thought that a vine makes, right? The sunflower, just like it's heliocentric, right? It's going to turn, right? So theologically, what happens to us when God uses or when you use an image that isn't as simple as making a good choice? Yeah, or Dean, what do you have?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with the lesson. Is it the switching between the two entities, or is it the backing of either? The transplantation?
Good question. I think I'm not sure if I would say it quite as forcefully or declaratively as you've invited me to with your question. I think ultimately the answer is both. But I do think this is more of a, let me show you what's going on here than a tell me when you made a bad choice kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Do you think there's much significance to the fact that that the prophet is asked for both a riddle and an allegory here? Because this is a more, at least to me, it is a more challenging parable than some other. I mean, some others are so thin in terms of how much you have to work to get the lesson out of them. And as you said, there is something about the difference between the tree and the vine, where the vine is a little harder to sort of figure out, well, what are we supposed to learn from that?
Yeah.
So I wonder about the riddle part of it.
Yeah, textually, the word riddle is, I think I'm right. The the verb that is used for the declaring of this thing, the propound a riddle, I'm pretty sure this is the only place the verb is used. The noun, which is translated for us as riddle, occurs 8 times outside of Judges. Judges like riddles. The book of Judges likes riddles. But it's not a common word. It doesn't just mean riddle. That's a choice in how to translate this. Other translations use saying. But I think riddle is fair because it's not just a proclamation. It's something for you to have to think about. Like, I think the point is, I'm giving you something that you're going to be scratching your head over for a while. Yeah, which is to say, I don't think it's supposed to have a simple answer. And maybe we would even say, I don't know, would we say that this is the kind of thing where if all of God's people heard it, it would be good and faithful if God's people came up with different conclusions? Like, would we say that that's true? I wonder. Yeah. Next, Ray, or whoever's next. Yeah.
I've got botanical heartburn about this top of the tree.
Yeah.
We have a happy ending here in verse 22.
Yeah, we haven't gotten there yet, but yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Please explain. Is this a miraculous replanting? That violates principles of horticulture? I mean, help me out.
Yeah, I don't know, but I saw last night. I'd never seen this before. That if you hack your Bradford pear tree all the way back to where it's just a stump, you can actually graft onto your Bradford pear tree good pears, like native pears, and they'll grow. And once you graft it, you lose the thing that would be invasive. I don't know about cedar trees and the grafting of cedar trees. I think, as we'll see in the next bit, I think the parable works because it assumes that you can do that transplanting. Yeah. Also, like hydrangea are good at this, right? If y'all see, like if you want a hydrangea row, like you can actually dig a trench and like put a hydrangea branch under the ground and it'll kind of sprout up like that. Anyway,
Well, I was just thinking the top of the tree is the crown of the tree.
Yes.
In terms of the allegory.
Yeah, crown. Yeah.
Yeah, and the royal family being transplanted.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't think the point of the parable is the sprig is supposed to die. Whether you can do that or not, I think there's enough of a horticultural assumption about the ability to graft or transplant the crown of the tree that even if the audience knows you can't do that with a cedar tree, it would have to be this other kind of tree, the prophet would say, don't get lost in the details. Just trust me here. Just work with me here. Preacher's got to preach, right? Yeah.
I just recently cut off the top of a palm tree. We live in Coronado, California.
Yeah.
And I cut it totally off because it was so ugly. And then I read that if the center is still, and I can't remember the name of the center, but it was probably a Latin word, the heart, but it was a different word than that. But if the heart was still there, even though I couldn't see it, it would come back. And lo and behold, after 3 weeks of being away, I now see greenery again.
Yeah, the stump of Jesse, right? It's out of a stump, right? Yeah. There's a tree. I was walking by a tree somewhere in town the other day where there's a stump, and I think someone's actually planted a tree in the stump. I don't think it's a shoot. Like, I think they dug it out, put dirt there, and planted a tree there. But anyway, before we run out of time, let's read the end. Let's read the hopeful bit. Who would read for us, please, from Ezekiel 17 and hear how God kind of takes this image and reallocates it? Yeah. Thank you, Adam.
Thus says the Lord God, I myself will take a sprig from the lofty top of a cedar. I will set it out. I will break off a tender one from the topmost of its young twigs. I myself will plant it on a high and lofty mountain. On the mountain height of Israel I will plant it, in order that it may produce boughs and bear fruit and become a noble cedar. Under it every kind of bird will live. In the shade of its branches will nest winged creatures of every kind. All the trees of the field shall know that I am the Lord. I bring low the high tree, I make high the low tree. I dry up the green tree and make the dry tree flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will accomplish it.
Thank you. There's a lot packed in there. What do you notice? What would you want to take away from this? If you had just heard the prophet give the first parable, and then give the historical grounding of the parable, and then speak these words, what are you taking with you? Yeah, Richard.
One thing that comes to my mind is that the empires will fall and ultimately fail, but Israel will survive.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah. And where is it planted? On Mount Zion, where the temple is, right? God's holy mountain, this holy place. Think about all the Psalms who talk about that, right? There's a lot of language here. Yeah. What else? What else did you take away from this?
You've made a lot of bad choices, but it's going to work out.
Yeah. What else? What else? Yeah.
I'm not obsessing over the tree. I think the vine is what's the moral of the story, because you put a grapevine on the ground or many vines on the ground, they will reroot next to itself. You can chop it up and you can leave it on the ground and it'll come back as stuff. And you've got a great fruit with grapes and so on and so forth. I think the vine analogy in this parable is the one of everlasting message.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, Ray.
Well, I notice we have a noble vine and a noble cedar.
Yes, noble. There's probably some double entendre there. Yep, as in like a noble and noble. Yep. What else? Notice the bird of every kind will live in its branches. Right? It's a common messianic image, into the world image, an eschatological image for God's people, right? Like God will become God to everybody. All the nations will come to the temple, or all the birds will seek shade in its branches, right? So there's a universalism here. There's a sense in which when God plants the top of the cedar, when God reestablishes this lineage, this messianic lineage, Davidic lineage, that the tree that will grow will be noble. It will be on God's mount, and it will be for all the birds of the air, for all the nations. Yeah.
It seems like it's better to end up as a noble cedar than a noble vine.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think, I think it is a faithful inquiry to ask, what happens to the vine? And the rabbis would probably teach us something about that. Yeah. Garrett.
I was kind of going in a similar way that you almost just took us, which is, it seems like in the first part of the parable, there is some self-autonomy. And then in the end, in this piece, it is God is the only one in control.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, I mean, maybe that just comes back to predestination and that whole argument, but like, turning the question to you, how would you think about autonomy versus God's will?
Yeah, I think if you've always believed that God will always keep you safe, if you've always believed that your nation, your people are God's chosen, and that God will never leave you deserted, and after believing that for generations, the walls crumble and the monarchy is over and all of the heirs are dead. There's nobody on the throne. I think it would feel to me like I would need to ground that experience in a relationship with God. Otherwise, you just give up on God, right? Otherwise, you say, well, it turns out the God of Abraham wasn't the right God. Let's worship the God of Babylon or the God of Egypt. Or, we were wrong all along. So I think a lot of this it's not so much about, maybe it's to say the same thing, but from the different side. It's not so much about sort of God sort of predestined all these things to happen, but how do we need to talk about salvation history in a way that reminds us that no matter how many bad choices we make, or no matter how bad things get, or no matter how far away God or angry God seems, ultimately God brings all things back together. That's who God is. That's the way God works. Is that plan bigger than the choices you make? Absolutely. Do the choices you make matter? Absolutely. How do they fit together? Yeah, it just depends. But give me 500 years and I'll tell you, right? I mean, that's it, right? So I think what we take from this is that God is still God. God brings low the high tree, makes high the low tree, right? Dries up the green tree, makes the dry tree flourish. Like God is the one who does all this, which is to say, if you're parched, God is still a part of that. And for a good reason, that maybe transcends our understanding. And when you flourish again, not if, but when you flourish again, God will be in the flourishing. Yeah, I think that's the thing to wrestle with. And I think that's hard for us. It's hard for us who have lived in an era of prosperity for a really long time to believe that God is present and active in the judgment. That's hard for us. Yeah. All right, next week, I will start a 5-week series on the stewardship of sexuality. We're talking about sex, talking about what sex is, how it's a gift. And what I really want to talk about is how do we use our sexual identity to glorify the one who has given it to us. So it should be an interesting 5-week series, and I hope to see you then. Thanks.